Hello and welcome to the Signal Sit Down. We are at the Pentagon, and you might have noticed that things have been moving quickly in Washington, D.C. over the past year. Of course, I don't need to tell you what changed in January. You already know, and you probably participated in it. To borrow a term from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the Trump administration has been working on moving at, quote, the speed of relevance. But perhaps the thing that has moved the fastest in the last few months is the United States policy regarding Venezuela. For over 90 days now, the United States has been performing airstrikes in the waters that surround Latin and South America, the waters of the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific. There have been over 20 of these strikes targeting what the government has claimed are narco-terrorists. These narco-terrorists are people attempting to bring drugs into the United States. Of course, it's good that this administration is treating the threat of drugs, the drug trade, and the drug traffickers seriously. But from the start, these strikes have been tied to Venezuela and the regime of Nicolas Maduro. And since they began, the usual suspects in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, and in think tanks and NGOs have been calling for regime change. And on Tuesday, at a cabinet meeting, President Trump told reporters that, quote, we are going to start doing those strikes on land, end quote, being Venezuela as well. So maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit. A recent CBS YouGov poll found that 76% of Americans believe the administration needs to explain its position on the use of military force in Venezuela. And that same poll found that 53% are in support of the strikes, a majority in support against these narco-terrorists looking to bring drugs into the United States. But what they want to understand is what this has to do with Venezuela. If you're getting deja vu with the Iraq War, what does Saddam Hussein have to do with a group of Saudi nationals flying planes into the World Trade Center? I certainly don't blame you. There is a little bit of that here. That CBS YouGov poll found that 70% of Americans are against taking military action in Venezuela. And it's not because they are Maduro simps or secret Venezuelan communist sleeper agents here in the United States. If they were, this country would have much bigger problems. I think most of our communist problem is homegrown. No, they are skeptical because Venezuela is a country of 30 million people and it's geographically twice the size of Iraq. And they have noticed, or at least intuited, that the current operations around Venezuela undertaken by the U.S. government seem to seek to close the walls in on Maduro and the communist regime there. So the question then becomes, how do we get here? On August 7th, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced she was increasing the reward for information leading to the arrest of Maduro to $50 million. These charges were relating to narcotics trafficking that date back to the first Trump administration, by the way. There was already a bounty on Maduro's head. But Maduro isn't in hiding, mind you. I mean, he's having rallies in Caracas. He's a wanted man, a bad man. But it's not like we don't know where he is. Anyway, later that month, the Trump administration started to place more assets in the Caribbean, particularly a number of naval assets and thousands of troops. Of course, the USS Gerald Ford, the biggest aircraft carrier that we have, is now in that region as well. And at the time, when they were starting to position those troops, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt set the stage for the narco-terrorist strikes and linked Maduro to the activities America would soon undertake in the Caribbean, calling Maduro the, quote, fugitive head of a drug cartel, end quote. More on that drug cartel in a moment, but these developments came as a surprise because the Trump administration and the Maduro government seemed to be getting along okay. They had just agreed to a prisoner exchange and the resumption of Venezuelan oil exports through Chevron. And these strikes that started in early September were under the justification that these strikes are targeting narco-terrorists. But is Maduro a narco-terrorist? Is he the head of a narco-terrorist drug cartel? Is the Venezuelan regime a narco-terrorist regime? Well, let's look at the narco part of that. Let's look at the numbers. Fentanyl is obviously the top drug of concern for the United States. About 125,000 people have died from fentanyl overdoses in the past 2 years in the United States. Americans, 125,000 of them. And upwards of 70% of the fentanyl that enters the United States originates from Mexico. And the precursor ingredients come from China. Venezuela has very little to do with fentanyl trafficking to the United States. And compared to Mexico, a country that's supposedly our ally, it's minuscule. Of course, the drug of choice when you move farther south is cocaine. Venezuela is involved in the cocaine trade, most definitely. But it's more a transport hub. The big producers are Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, etc., but especially Colombia. Estimates vary, but most say about 10 to 20% of the cocaine headed to the United States makes its way through Venezuela. So the question is, why Venezuela, as opposed to bigger drug problem countries like Mexico or Colombia? And that's the explanation the American people want. That's the explanation the American people deserve. Nevertheless, by October of this year, the New York Times was reporting that the pressure campaign against Maduro led the Venezuelan president to offer President Donald Trump and the Trump administration a deal that would have given the United States access to oil and gold industries, preferential contracts to American businesses. Venezuela also would have reversed the flow of Venezuelan oil exports from China to the United States. And Maduro also said he would slash his country's energy and mining contracts with Chinese, Iranian, and Russian firms. The Trump administration rejected this offer, and it continued to carry on with strikes on these drug boats in the region. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also announced it would be designating the Cartel de los Soles, or the Cartel of the Sun, a foreign terrorist organization on November 16th. And that designation from the press release would take effect on November 24th. In the release, Rubio names Maduro the head of the Cartel of the Sun. But the Cartel of the Sun isn't your normal cartel. It's actually a slang term that Venezuelan journalists started to use in the 1990s to describe corrupt military and law enforcement officials that are involved in drug running. Cartel of the Sun comes from the sun insignias on their military uniforms. And the corruption runs deep in Venezuela. There's no denying that. But it's not the same as Tren de Aragua or other cartels. And Maduro is not Pablo Escobar, at least on this front, on the drug-making front. Both mustache guys, though. And on November 18th, the New York Times reported that the president had signed off on CIA operations in Venezuela. So 2 days after, they come out with this designation for the Cartel of the Sun. And in a stunningly transparent move, just hours later, Trump himself confirmed he authorized the CIA operations when asked about the Times report. Quote, "I authorized for 2 reasons, really," Trump said. Number 1, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America, end quote. The second reason the president said was that, quote, "we have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela," end quote. Then on a November 21st phone call, according to reports, Maduro made another offer to Trump. Again, this is 3 days before Maduro is going to get slapped with that foreign terrorist organization label from being the head of the Cartel of the Sun. According to these reports, Maduro said he'd be willing to leave Venezuela with his family if he was given amnesty, if the U.S. removed sanctions, if the U.S. helped end his ICC case, if the U.S. removed sanctions on 100 different Venezuelan government officials, and if the U.S. allowed Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez run for an interim government ahead of new elections. Now, Trump rejected most of these requests. Which ones specifically he rejected, we don't know. But some of those objections are completely understandable, reasonable, not going to be something in the policy portfolio of the United States. But Trump also reportedly gave Maduro an ultimatum. You and your family have a week to get out. As of this recording, Maduro has not left. But what would happen if Maduro left, whether by his own volition or by force? What's more likely? Venezuela gets better or it gets worse? Maybe we should ask the people in Libya or Iraq. Like all leaders, dictators or small d democratic leaders, Maduro is the head of a coalition. In the U.S., political coalitions include religious Christians and libertarians and national security hawks if you're on the right, or if you're on the left, LGBT allies and like union workers. In Venezuela, and in many countries around the world, things are different. In Venezuela, Maduro's coalition is composed of the armed forces, the Socialist Party itself, the cartels he has to keep in check, militants from Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, bad neighborhood. The same and sad, ugly truth is that if Maduro leaves, another strongman would probably just take his place. And maybe that strongman isn't strong enough, and the cartels take over and control territory like they do in Mexico right now. And then Venezuelan drugs really become a problem. So the question is, what is the United States trying to extract out of Maduro and get out of these operations in Venezuela? I don't think it's nation building per se. I think regime change and nation building are different things. I don't think we're going to be in Venezuela for 30 years. I really hope not. Some people are saying it's the oil, but Maduro reportedly offered that. Some people are saying it's China, but that was also part of the previous offer too. So what is it? Right now, all the American people are asking for is an explanation. And to provide that explanation, we sat down with Pentagon Press Secretary Kingsley Wilson on this episode of the Signal Sit Down about the Department of War's ongoing operations in our near abroad. We hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Kingsley Wilson, welcome to the Signal Sit Down. Thank you for having us here at the Pentagon. We're in the briefing room right now. As people in this administration has been prone to say, things are moving at Trump's speed. I think the area in which things have been moving the most at Trump's speed recently is our foreign policy vis-a-vis Venezuela. We're about 90 days into these strikes on narco-terrorists in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific. The American people are supportive of those strikes, but they want more information and they want more answers. So first, I wanted to let you provide an overview of what the operation has been in the Caribbean so far, the assets we have positioned there, and why we're doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll start at the beginning. The president on the campaign trail talked about ending narco-terrorism and bringing deadly drugs into the United States. We saw under the previous administration a lot of deadly narcotics and narco-terrorists come into our southern border. It was basically totally unchecked. Anyone could just walk across the southern border. We had no idea who they were, what cartel connections they could possibly have. And that was a threat that the president saw and rightfully diagnosed as a national security issue. And he was elected by the whole of the American people to dismantle that threat and to protect the homeland. So when he designated those organizations, designated terrorist organizations, what that did for us at the department is it unlocked a lot of optionality. We were now able to engage in a way that we never could before. We were able to engage in lethal and kinetic ways. And you've seen that with our boat strikes. So that's been a real focus. Homeland Defense has been a real focus for this Department of War. And I think previously we've spent a lot of time, this Pentagon has in particular, of focusing on foreign homelands, defending their borders. Now we're defending our own shores, the Gulf of America. We're defending the southern border. We've got nearly 10,000 troops down there right now with Border Patrol. So it's been a huge, I think, priority shift for this administration. And we've got a lot of assets that are down there. I think near 20% of our Navy now is down in the Southcom AOR. We had a carrier go from EUCOM from Europe all the way down to the Caribbean. I can't remember the last time an aircraft carrier was in the Caribbean. It's very historic to have that level of military might just off of our shores and in our own hemisphere. So this is something that's very important to the Secretary and to the President, and we will continue to seek out these narco-terrorists, whatever country they come from. There's obviously been a lot of focus on Venezuela. There's some countries that are worse offenders than others when it comes to narco-terrorism. But whether you're a Colombian narco-terrorist or, a Venezuelan Tren de Aragua terrorist, we will make sure that if you're bringing drugs to the United States of America, you are taken out and that threat is eliminated. So we've been very proud to be a part of this mission, and we'll continue to find these narco-trafficker and take them out as much as we can.
And, of course, these strikes have become quite the media cycle this week. You addressed that in the briefing room on Tuesday. I'm less interested in the current media scandal about all of these strikes and more about the geopolitical implications, because I think that's actually what's interesting here. Of course, the administration has sometimes more explicitly, sometimes less explicitly tied the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela to the operations that are being performed and the assets that we have staged throughout the region. This has created a lot of pressure on the Maduro regime. And, I think the president yesterday during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, he was talking about potentially doing land strikes in Venezuela. What type of objectives does this Pentagon see kinetic force achieving in Venezuela? One of the watchwords for, I think, the MAGA movement and folks on the right these days is the word regime change. I think people are very skeptical of regime change, especially after the disasters of Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, you and I have talked about this many times previously. What is the effort here? What is the end goal? What would you like to see the Maduro regime change or do differently in response to this pressure?
So I think the commander-in-chief will be the one to make the ultimate decision, of course. And we as the Department of War will stand behind him and execute on those orders. I know I mentioned in the briefing yesterday that we are very much a planning department. We have a contingency plan for everything. And if called upon by the commander-in-chief, we will deliver on whatever action is directed for us. So that's why we have a lot of assets in the region. It provides optionality for the president. And we are consistently pushing up those best military advice and options to him. The chairman and the secretary are doing that regularly. And we will, of course, make recommendations, but ultimately the decision will be his. And in terms of Venezuela specifically, we want to make sure that we have a Western hemisphere that is secure and that is dominated by America, right? I think America First really requires an America First Western hemisphere as well. So we want to make sure that if there are any threats to our people or to our interests, we are working alongside the State Department and others to deal with those threats. And our warriors stand ready to execute on that whenever called upon. So going to the Southcom region is historic in many ways for our warfighters and for the department. And I think also to assuage some of the concerns you were talking about, I think the American people are rightly fearful of regime change. It's something this Pentagon and State Department in previous administrations have tried for years and failed at for years. And I think we can have confidence that this is a Secretary of War who fought in Afghanistan, right? Who saw the difficulty of endless war with little success, with not a clear end state. And this is a president who is a peace president, who does not seek war, and who does not seek nation building or regime change. So we're going to be focused always on putting America first. And I think you saw that with Operation Midnight Hammer too. That was an operation with a clear end state, a clear objective. We struck, dismantled their nuclear capabilities, and exited. So the president, I think we can have confidence in his decision making, and the secretaries as well.
So you mentioned optionality and how these different designations allow you to engage in kinetic activity if you need to. Of course, one of the major developments in the way in which our foreign policy vis-a-vis Venezuela has changed is designating the Cartel of the Sun a foreign terrorist organization. And you know this as well as I, that the Cartel of the Sun is this kind of weird amorphous thing. It's essentially saying that corruption is so bad in Venezuela that members of the military, members of the government, members of the Socialist Party that Maduro oversees are working hand in glove to enrich themselves in a very poor country through this type of drug trafficking effort. This designation in particular, because it's not like Hamas, it's not like Tren de Aragua, it's kind of more amorphous constellation of different corrupt forces within the country. But that designation, I mean, what does it actually do for you? They've said Maduro is the head of this cartel of the sun as the president of Venezuela, though the United States believes that he's an illegitimate leader. Does it allow you to take kinetic action against members of the Venezuelan government, Maduro himself even? I mean, what type of optionality does that designation for the cartel of the sun provide?
So it gives us options to plan for different scenarios. And I can't get into, for OPSEC reasons, what a lot of those could be. We don't want to communicate to any of our enemies, right, what could be coming or what may be coming. So all I can say from our perspective at the Department of War is we stand ready. If the president ever calls upon us, we always say, and Secretary Hegseth always says, no one waits on the War Department. So we've got our assets down there. We've been doing a lot of training missions, and we've got folks that are equipped and ready to be lethal if needed. And we've also got folks that are willing to, take out these narco-terrorist boats and continue the importance of that operation. But going forward, I think from what you will see from the department is just a willingness to serve at the commander-in-chief's beck and call and at his direction.
Last question for you, because I know we're short on time. You mentioned this hemispheric approach, as some other people have been calling it in this media row, the Don Rowe Doctrine.
I love that.
I love that. So the Don Rowe Doctrine, we look at Mexico, that is the primarily the conduit for fentanyl coming into the United States, yet considered an ally of the United States. We look at Colombia. That's where most of the cocaine comes from. And actually the drugs that traffic through Venezuela often originate from Colombia and then are networked out from there. We still have strong ties to the Colombian military and try to help them in certain ways. As you guys are trying to restructure the way in which America behaves in its own hemisphere, what do you make of countries like Mexico and Colombia, which critics of the administration's Venezuela policy have pointed to and say, well, those guys are actually the bigger problems when it comes to drug policy. What could we be seeing in the future from this administration? What has the administration already done in order to reshape the United States' approach to this hemisphere?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we do have good mill-to-mill relationships with the Colombians, with the Mexicans as well. We're doing a lot of joint patrols along the U.S. southern border right now with the Mexican military. And, I don't think you can trust any partner 100%, right? The president always says, I don't trust anybody 100%. But there are people that we can work with, and there are areas in which our interests overlap. So we will continue to work with people and to train with people as much as we are able. Of course, we always make sure our America First interests are protected, our national security is protected. But I would just again reiterate that what we're doing with these boats in the Southcom AOR is not just focused on a single country. It is focused on all narco-terrorists, wherever they may come from. If they are bringing drugs to the United States, to our shores to kill our people, we will kill them. We will sink their boats. So that is going to remain a critical priority for us going forward.
Kingsley Wilson, thank you for coming on the Signal Sit Down.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.